Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar dedicated to our real estate participants. My name is Nicole. I'm the Director of Member Relations and Strategic Accounts here at GRESB, and I'll be your host for today's session. On behalf of GRESB, we're delighted to have you all with us today. So, what can you expect from today's session? We'll first hear from Sarah Welton, Director of the GRESB Foundation, followed by Charles Van Thiel, Director of Real Estate Standards, and we'll finish off with a Q&A session. We received a lot of questions during registration, so thank you all for that. But unfortunately, we can't cover everything today, but we will cover the most frequently asked questions. Please do reach out to us via our website, email, or get in touch with your main GRESB contact. Now, let's get started. Please give a warm welcome to Sarah Welton, who will kick things off with an update on our foundation roadmap.
Hello, my name is Sarah Welton, and I'm the Director of the GRESB Foundation. I'm proud to announce that just last week, we published the third annual Foundation Roadmap. It's packed with tons of useful information, including a snapshot of the work at the end of 2025 and a high-level plan for the development of the GRESB standards in 2026 and beyond. Key elements of the roadmap include a deep dive into the Foundation's mission and membership, as well as its standards development priorities and a plan of action for 2026 through 2028. This year, we also highlighted high-profile activities that support the continued enhancement and relevance of the standards throughout the roadmap. I hope you enjoy reading it. The Foundation's roadmap is more than a report. It's a vision of how our industry can lead the global transition towards resilient, high-performing real asset. It reflects the collaboration of hundreds of investors, managers, and experts who believe that sustainability isn't just good ethics, it's good economics.
Thank you, Sarah, for sharing this exciting roadmap. Now, Charles, over to you for the updates on the standards.
Thank you, Nico, for the introduction. And hi, everyone. Good to see so many of you today. And thanks for joining this webinar on the road ahead. My name is Charles. I'm Director of Real Estate Standard at GRESB, and I'm also the RESC Secretary. And what does that mean? It means that my role consists of working in close collaboration with the GRESB Foundation on the methodological development relating to the real estate standard over time. And on behalf of the GRESB Foundation, I'm excited to share with you today some insights into the future evolution of the real estate standard, in particular, its evolution towards a performance-based scoring. Before we deep dive, let me highlight a couple key reference documents for your benefit. In last October, so a month ago, GRESB published the update to the real estate standard, which essentially provides you with a clear understanding of the formal and already approved update to the real estate standard for both 2026 and 2027, so 2 years. And this is a document that we publish every year, and it has a rather short-term horizon, so 2 years notice. And you can interpret this document as essentially, what is it that I need to do in order to get ready to report to GRESB next year. The second document I want to highlight, which is something that we'll kind of spend a bit more time talking about today, is what we published at the end of last week, so end of November, is the annual Foundation Roadmap document. And this document offers a much longer term strategic perspective on how the standard is expected to evolve in the years to come. And in particular, in this document, I'd like to draw your attention to a section called Road to Performance, which essentially outlines the journey ahead for the real estate standard. So without further ado, let me kind of start describing what that road to performance looks like. So this is one of the most important deliverables from the GRESB Foundation this year. And in a few words, what is it? We are talking about a multi-year plan for evolving the standards towards a performance-based scoring. And for your reference, this evolution has been identified by the GRESB Foundation as the highest strategic priority for the standards for the years to come. This is rather a long-term plan because we're talking about a horizon of 5 to 10 years. We know how valuable such forward-looking visibility is to our membership based on your feedback. So we hope that this roadmap will land well with you today. Now, this plan is not necessarily synonymous of more questions, more requirements, more reporting workload in the standards. It can actually, if anything, be considered as a reinterpretation of existing data points. So really to clarify, this plan heavily leverages on existing data points already collected in the standards and doesn't necessarily mean more burden to report to GRESB. Actually, it is fair to say that if you look at over the last 10 years, we have rather observed a scope expansion when it comes to standard development. So more topics being assessed, more questions being added, more requirements overall. This trend is actually going to reverse over the next 10 years, where we definitely expect more of a reduction in scope with an increasing focus on a few key performance metrics in the future. Now, the direction towards performance-based scoring is not new. It's actually been mentioned for a few years already in previous versions of the foundation roadmap. So you can argue this isn't really new so far. However, there are some central questions to this direction that had remained unanswered until today, which made this direction somewhat a little bit abstract or unclear for our membership. And so on behalf of the foundation today, I'm really excited to announce that those central questions have been answered, such as what is performance? What is the magnitude that we're talking about? What topics, what timeline do we intend to adopt? So those questions have now been answered, which is what I'm going to walk you through in a moment. So the results here is that there's a lot more clarity on how this known future evolution of the standards has now been calibrated by the GRESB Foundation to ultimately make this journey much more concrete for participants and investor members. All right, so before diving into the details, I'd like to highlight the three core principles that the foundation established as essentially guiding their development, the development of this future roadmap. The first one is alignment between the GRESB results and the real-world outcomes and impact. Feedback received from our investors of the last few years has been very clear. They expect a much clearer link between the GRESB scores and the actual performance and impact achieved by their investments. And this is illustrated by LPs currently seeking assurance that their capital generates real-world positive impact and delivers demonstrable performance outcome. This is the first pillar that has been really shaping the development of this roadmap. 2, focus on sustainability fundamentals to reduce risk and support long-term value creation. There's a clear desire for re-emphasizing the actual value that any sustainability metric brings to portfolios participating in GRESB, which this means that all indicators in the standard are heavily scrutinized through a lens of risk mitigation or value creation. And this means in turn that in the case of current indicators or requirements for which that link is not clear or is too weak, these indicators are expected to be retired from the standards in the future. And 3, for the standard to remain pragmatic and useful for our data consumers and large investor members, there needs to be a clearer recognition of leadership in the industry. This means a clearer differentiation in the scores among participants, as well as the ability for participants to demonstrate what they do beyond the general scope of the standards and beyond what is generally considered common practices today. So bottom line here is that these principles have been kept at all times when developing this roadmap, and will be continuously kept in mind when refining this roadmap in the next iteration of the roadmap in the future years. All right, so let's get into the first details of the roadmap then, and let's start with performance. When we think about performance roadmap, the first central question of this work has actually been, what is it that we mean by performance? How is it defined? And I'm sure that if we ask many people in the audience today, what do you mean by performance? We're probably expecting several definitions, several explanations. So generally, the most common approach to defining performance is the absolute way. So on the left-hand side of this slide. And if you take the example of, say, energy performance, this would translate into how energy efficient an asset is. So the lower its energy use intensity, the higher its energy performance through an absolute lens. However, the GRESB Foundation is quite adamant on the fact that limiting this approach to only absolute would not resonate with a significant proportion of the industry out there. Think of specific investment strategies, such as value add or brown to green, which essentially aim to buy low quality assets, improve their sustainability performance, and then sell them back to the market and obviously generate an added value through the process. These type of portfolios would, in practice, never qualify for high absolute performance, since the very essence of the strategy is to not hold high performance assets in the portfolio, because their strategy is to sold it once it's high performance. So these strategies would, in fact, never really actually generate a high score. However, these are the very strategies that actually generate the most positive impact on the real economy. And these players should absolutely be incentivized to perform well from a scoring perspective. So with this in mind, the overarching purpose to bring the wider industry along with us on this roadmap, it is critical to also recognize through our system of scoring actual improvement achieved by portfolio over a certain period of time, because it is those very improvements that are real world impact. This means that as an asset is able to demonstrate clear improvement over time, even if it's not yet highly performant from an absolute perspective, this asset should be rewarded with points through our system of scoring. And this kind of essentially results in a dual approach to defining performance in the standards, either absolute or relative, which is improvement based. Either scenario would be rewarded in the GRESB standard, as part of this performance roadmap. This also means that the only scenario where an asset is not rewarded through points from GRESB is a scenario where it is not already highly efficient, nor able to demonstrate tangible improvement over time. This is a logic that I'm sure many of us can kind of stand behind. This is a situation where you would expect an asset not to be rewarded by the GRESB standards. So I'd like to illustrate this kind of a dual approach to performance with a couple charts. This is a typical distribution of EUI for a specific asset type in a certain geography. The classic GRESB approach is to reward performance through the concept of like-for-like change, or improvement of an intensity of an asset over time. In this performance roadmap, the foundation introduces thresholds to defining high absolute performance levels, irrespective of year-on-year change. This means that an asset that may be subject to small variation every year, but as long as it's considered highly efficient during the year, it continues to be rewarded in GRESB. Now, combining the two approaches into one single methodology results in a situation where any asset can qualify for credits in GRESB via two paths: either achieving high level of performance, the blue-green box on the left-hand side, or demonstrate clear improvement over time, which is the green arrow. And to give you a sense of proportions, in 2025, we observed that about 22% of all assets reporting to GRESB, so about among the 200,000 assets reporting to GRESB every year, showed energy use intensity values below high performance threshold, and hence considered highly efficient today. We've observed that 19% of them were demonstrating tangible year-on-year improvements, although not already highly efficient in an absolute way. And finally, 59% of assets showed neither improvement nor high level of performance. And that gives you a bit of a sense of how much more room there is in the industry today to drive the whole markets forward in terms of achieving tangible improvement over time to ultimately reach high level of absolute performance in the future. Moving on to magnitude now. Magnitude really is about how many points are we talking about? What is the range that the foundation envisages for this evolution? And this is something that you as industry members have asked us many times. Okay, direction is clear. What is the magnitude? And here the foundation envisions at least 50% of the total GRESB score to be exclusively determined by the underlying performance of reporting portfolio. And to give you a sense of comparison, today in 2025, we estimate that this number is around 12%, which essentially is energy, greenhouse gas, water, and waste performance in the standards. So this creates a pretty significant gap to bridge of an amount of at least 38 points over time to bridge over time. And the foundation is clear on this target weight has to be significant in order to drive meaningful progress within industries. This is why this number is pretty significantly more than 12% today. And so for the ones of you that are most familiar with the GRESB assessment and the GRESB results today, you will certainly understand that a reallocation of 38 points is pretty substantial. Now, what does that 50% cover? You can also wonder, like, what is the scope that the foundation has in mind to inform this evolution, right? And here it's important to clarify that we are not only talking about the performance topics that are currently covered in the standards. I was mentioning earlier, energy, greenhouse gas, water, and waste. We're also talking about all performance. We're actually talking about all performance topics considered material when it comes to real estate sustainability. So we're not talking about only those four, but really we can expect other topics to come into the scope into the future to inform that 50% allocation in the future. We're also expecting kind of as we're expecting other topics to be introduced in the future, this kind of a introduction will certainly be a function of how more mature the industry is becoming, how ready the membership is to actually be assessed on those topics, and how the underlying methodology develops accordingly. And to illustrate that concept, I'd like to show you this table, which essentially provides you a bit of an overview of the speed and the practicality of this performance roadmap. And you will realize that some of the factors that really influence the speed and practicality are really very much exogenous to GRESB. And to illustrate that, look at this table, which is kind of going to inform a little bit the order of topics that will be subject to performance scoring in the standard in the future. At the top of this table, you will notice that the industry itself needs to be mature enough on a certain topic to even be considered a candidate for performance scoring in GRESB. This means that a topic has to be deemed material, and it has to be a general convergence towards what constitutes an appropriate performance metric that could be subject to scoring in the GRESB standards in the future. And to give you an example, if you take biodiversity in nature, right, this topic is generally considered material for a piece of real estate. And yet, I'm sure that some would disagree here, but generally is considered material for a piece of real estate. But certainly, there hasn't been a clear performance metric defined by the industry, the industry hasn't really converged towards one performance metric yet. So a lot of work is happening at that level, which is to define the kind of the industry endorsed performance metric for biodiversity in nature. But this topic is by far not in a position to be scored from a performance perspective in GRESB. So there's no way this topic gets expedited for a performance scoring approach, simply because the industry itself is not considered mature enough. Lower level, now assuming a topic is already considered material and our performance metric is well defined by the industry, our very membership, so the GRESB membership, also needs to be ready to be assessed. Meaning our participants have to be able to collect the relevant data from their stakeholders, and they have to be able to report that data to GRESB. And so this is where the concept of data availability and reporting burden comes into play. There's no point for GRESB to reallocate a very significant amount of points to a certain performance topic when the majority of our participants are still unable to collect or report the data to GRESB. That would just defeat the purpose, right? And here, to illustrate this kind of a stage, I can offer you embodied carbon as a really good example. Embodied carbon, certainly a topic that is very material, but still encounters a lot of challenges regarding data collection and reliability. And as a result, the key focus for GRESB as we speak is to heavily incentivize the industry to report complete and reliable embodied carbon data, based on which the actual performance will be subsequently scored in the standard. But the focus is not yet to develop a scoring methodology for performance, simply because the focus of the industry is still on the data collection and data reliability. And finally, the last category at the bottom of this table corresponds to the very methodological development underpinning the GRESB standards. And for a topic that is deemed material and for which there is a convergence on the performance metrics and where our members are both able to collect and report the data to GRESB, then the question is whether the GRESB standard is appropriately assessing and scoring that performance metric in the standard. And as of today, energy has been definitely identified by the GRESB Foundation as sufficiently mature to be absorbing a lot more scoring weights in the standards, which is why one of the key priorities will be energy as part of this performance roadmap. And for your reference, it is also because the GRESB standards back in 2025, earlier this year, recently aligned with the ASHRAE 100 standard to score energy performance in an absolute manner. And that allows us to essentially qualify the methodology for being mature enough to be absorbing a lot more scoring weights going forward. In addition, the methodology supporting GHG performance now is currently not considered mature enough, which is why the current effort from the GRESB Foundation perspective is actually to finalize the technical development to assess GHG performance in an absolute manner. And so here the plan for the next 12 months is to finalize that methodology so that before the changes impacting the 2028 standards are being formally approved by the GRESB Foundation in October 2026. So the last point I want to leave you with on this table is that I find valuable in this slide is that it also allows you to understand that the intention here is not to reallocate significant scoring weights to all performance topics at once, simply because those topics don't have the same maturity levels. Instead, it is going to be about, this is going to happen in sequence, starting from the most mature topics, most mature and urgent topics, and going down the line so that our participants can also focus their efforts on really matters the most first. So talking about priorities now, I just mentioned order of the most mature and urgent topics. That obviously begs the question, okay, what are the priorities? And here the foundation has established a list of core sustainability topics that informs this evolution. And you can see this on the right side of the slide, where the Real Estate Standard Committee, the GRESB, intends to reassess this list on an annual basis going forward. But more importantly, the GRESB Foundation unanimously prioritizes climate-related topics with an initial focus on energy and greenhouse gas as topics subject to first transition to performance-based scoring. And for those topics, energy and greenhouse gas, dedicated scoring weights are set to 14% and 11% respectively, so that together they represent about 25% of the total GRESB score, which is expected to be around half of the total weight of the performance in the longer term. And there's been a lot of gap analysis made with other industry standards to make sure that those percentages remain in line with how the industry is thinking of how mature those topics are. Now, a side clarification here, when I say 25%, this 25% is only assessing the performance of those topics, as opposed to any areas of those topics, which means that, for example, if you take energy, 14%, that 14% excludes energy policy, energy risk assessment, energy data coverage. We're only talking about the pure performance assessment of energy, which is done, as a reminder, through two lenses, absolute or improvement over time. And finally, you will note that topics beyond energy and greenhouse gas have not yet been allocated formal weights. And this is intentional. The very reason for this is because the GRESB Foundation fully acknowledges that the maturity level of those topics often depend on several factors, such as the sector. And to give you an example, you could argue that water isn't that material for self-storage assets, right? So in the future, it is not sensible to think that to require self-storage assets to report on water performance data, let alone being assessed on its performance, on its water performance, right? So the reason why this is TBD as of now is because for those topics, there is an acknowledgement that there is a sector, sector are factors that heavily influence how material that is. And this is why one of the key work streams over the next 12 months is also going to be about, assessing how material those topics are across all sectors within the real estate industry. Finally, the reason why what I just described, sector-specific maturity does not apply to energy and greenhouse gas, and which is why some scoring weights have been set for those, is that these two topics are generally considered material for any type of real estate, irrespective of their geographies or sector, which means that we can expect those topics to be assessed within, consistent weight across all real estate sectors, but we don't expect the same approach to be applied to other topics in the future. So what is the timeline that we intend to follow in order to implement this roadmap? What is the pace that we envision? We talked about magnitude, we talked about direction, we didn't really talk about time yet. So this slide is particularly important as it illustrates a fundamental shift in the way the standards is going to develop in the coming years. And if you think about how the GRESB standards has been developing in the last 10 years, it is pretty fair to say that it's been changing rather incrementally. So a little bit of change every year. And this was actually done, intentionally in the past in order to avoid shocking the system and maximize year-on-year comparability in scores. This means that each year, GRESB has been, for the last 10 years approximately, GRESB has been releasing small changes of small magnitude in the standard so that the scores maintain a high level of comparability over time for our data consumers. Now, what has changed recently is that industry feedback from our membership has actually quite changed recently. The initial intention for this incremental approach has been to ensure year-on-year comparability, but we actually better understand now that any change that impact the scores and the methodology, even of small magnitude, such as decimals, actually creates frustration within our membership because it essentially leads to a situation where every year managers and investors are engaging with each other on why the scores have changed in decimals. And this in turn brings the focus of those conversations to small and tactical changes in the methodology of GRESB. And this is not the kind of engagement that GRESB wants to promote between investors and managers. GRESB wants to promote meaningful strategic engagement between investors and managers, an engagement that is on material topics, on strategic efforts that the fund is conducting, not on decimals being the results of tactical updates year on year in the standards. And so to promote a much more meaningful engagement between investors and managers, the foundation formally establishes a new model for developing the standards in the future. And that model is going to follow a staged approach. This means that in the future updates of the standards, will be a lot more significant and impactful, but at a slower cadence. So in pragmatic terms, you can expect that every 3 years, we will expect that a much more significant update introduced in the standards while maintaining complete stability between those years. Being one of the key benefits of this new phase approach is that we're moving away from an increment approach to a more of a phase approach combined of both years of stability and years of impact. Now, you could also argue that during those years of impact will shock the system. And that is true. But this is why I also want to draw your attention to what's highlighted in purple on the top right of this slide. So the square on the top right here, to support the industry and you during those years of impact, GRESB commits to do two things. One, maintain legacy scores, and two, anticipate future scores. Let me explain a little bit more. Legacy score means that each year of impact in the standards, so for example, 2028, right? GRESB intends to also provide to our participants backward-looking insights, essentially saying what an entity score would have been had GRESB not changed the rules of the game. And this will allow you as a participant to clearly communicate to your investors what the results of your sustainability efforts have been this year, even if the methodology has evolved at the same time. So essentially providing you with information that isolates the impact of the methodological development from GRESB so that you can demonstrate, highlight and demonstrate that your efforts have actually been fruitful. So apply to 2028 again. In 2027, we will provide, in 2028, sorry, we will provide a backward-looking score to our participants, which reflect the 2027 methodology. And the second one is visibility on future score. So it's rather the other way around. As a participant, how can I anticipate that known update to the standard will impact my score in the future and in what magnitude? And so here applied to 2028, we're talking about in 2027, so 1 year prior, we will provide our participants with a forward-looking insight into how the 2028 methodology is expected to impact their score, allowing them to anticipate change, already engage with your stakeholders and investors accordingly 1 year in advance, and ideally even take action to start mitigating some of that impact one year earlier. So to sum up, the model for developing the standards is changing. We're shifting away from an incremental approach to a phased approach, where the standards is expected to evolve more significantly than in the past, but at a slower cadence, adopting 3 years as a cadence. And each year of impact will be supported by both forward-looking anticipation and backward-looking comparability insights calculated specifically for reporting entities. And finally, these slides offer a bit more details around what is planned for the first year of implementation of this performance roadmap that is targeted for now for in 2028. And as discussed, the initial prioritization goes to both energy and greenhouse gas operational performance with a scoring weight of approximately 25% altogether. This weight will be freed up by reallocating 70 indicators considered common practices away from the annual assessment, and will make those 17 indicators a prerequisite to the main assessment. There's more information in the performance in the foundation roadmap document if you're interested to read more about those 17 indicators. And we also plan to reduce the importance of data coverage for these two topics, for energy and greenhouse gas, that remains consistent with the pivot to performance-based scoring. You would expect a decrease in importance in the underlying data coverage scoring. And finally, we intend to increase the emphasis on the data quality and its role, specifically its role in the measurement of performance metrics. And that's more technical development that will be happening over the next couple of months with the Real Estate Standing Committee. And finally here, last bullet of this slide, we also want to seize this opportunity, always with in mind the reporting effort of our participants, to retire completely, so getting rid of some of the highest effort and most burdensome indicators from the standards. And so here we intend to retire indicators up to actually 24 data points at the asset level are expected to be retired completely from the standards, which initial industry feedback on this has been really a genuine reduction in reporting burden. My last slide on this performance roadmap is really about you more than about us. Remember that as an industry initiative, GRESB highly values industry feedback. And to that end, the GRESB Foundation was very clear on the importance of engagement with our membership on this roadmap, and offers you the opportunity to express your opinion on this roadmap and how this roadmap lands with you. And to do so, I'm happy to announce that starting February 2026, we will be opening a public consultation process on behalf of the GRESB Foundation, where the various elements of this roadmap will be expanded a bit more into details, but this webinar is certainly a very strong basis, and they will be subject to feedback collection. So your feedback will be subsequently aggregated, analyzed, and considered by the very GRESB Foundation before approving the 2028 standards, to really gain confidence that in October 2026, this performance roadmap is considered industry endorsed. So let me briefly recap what I've just walked you through in just these 5 points, if that's okay. So first, investors' expectations are evolving. They increasingly expect that their capital generates real-world positive impact. We covered that earlier. The performance roadmap for the GRESB Real Estate Standard comes as a response to those expectations. It is not something that is created in an ad hoc manner. It really comes from industry feedback and evolving industry expectations. The GRESB Foundation releases this set of recommendations that constitute the performance roadmap of the real estate standard to the industry, that outlines their vision on how the standards is to evolve in the next 5 to 10 years. This roadmap is composed of years of stability and years of impact, and those years of impact will be supported by both backward-looking and forward-looking insights to support you as our members and to make sure that this transition is a smooth process for you and your organization. Finally, as an industry feedback matters. And so you have the opportunity to help shape this future. And so please do take the time to coordinate with your teams internally in your organization to provide a response to the public consultation, to make sure that in 12 months from now, we have an industry endorsed performance roadmap for the real estate standard. Let me hand over back to Nicole now to go through some of the questions from the audience, and I'd be happy to expand on any topic that we covered today. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles, for covering all these exciting updates. I'm buzzing with questions, so perfect timing because it's time for our Q&A session. We received a lot of great questions from our participants during their registration, so we'll be covering some of the most burning questions that we received. Are you ready, Charles?
More than ready.
So, the industry expresses urgency and a need for change around some of the discussed topics. I have to be honest, Charles, 2028 feels far away. So I've got two questions for you. One, could you talk us through why that's the chosen timing? And two, why it can't happen sooner?
That's a great question, Nicole. And actually, I'm pretty happy to announce, to even share with you that the very year for the first implementation of the standard, of the performance roadmap for the standard, has been extensively debated at both the Real Estate Standing Committee and the Foundation Board level. It may actually feel quite far into the future in 2028. It's like 3 years from now. But if you think about it a little bit more in details, 2028, GRESB 2028 actually relates to 2027 reporting year, right? Because the GRESB real estate standard always refer to the year prior. So when we say 2028, we actually mean 2027 reporting year, and this is an important distinction. We understand from the feedback that we receive is for things such as capex to improve energy profiles or carbon strategies, these budgets for 2027 are actually being discussed now. So to really provide visibility to our membership early enough for them to anticipate 2028, which look at 2027 reporting year, isn't considered that far into the future anymore. Now, the second point I want to say is in 2027, we've mentioned forward-looking insights many times. In 2027, remember that we already plan to provide our members with an anticipation of their impact on their entity from the 2028 methodology, which means that in 2027, which we'll be looking at the 2026 reporting year, participants are already expecting to see the first impact, more informal and unofficial, but impact nonetheless, of this new performance roadmap on their performance. So, and if you think about 2026, all of a sudden, we are talking about next month, right? So really, the time here is a bit of an interesting one, because on the one hand, 2028 may sound far, but if you actually discount all the steps that any real estate organization has to go through in order to be able to properly anticipate and to some extent mitigate that impact, these things start now. So, the folk, as I said earlier, the foundation kind of really thought about that year extensively, and if anything, the conversation really focused more on when is it that GRESB communicates on this roadmap more than when it is implemented, because the real world impact, as in real estate organizations taking action in their budgets to mitigate some of that impact, starts when things are being communicated, which essentially starts now.
Very good point. Exciting times.
Thanks.
So on to the next one. Well, now that we informed our participants of the changes and what's ahead of us, it does make me wonder, and you touched upon it slightly, but what is GRESB actually doing to make sure that investors are aware of these upcoming changes? And maybe more specifically, how does GRESB ensure investors are not surprised when their scores start to shift?
Indeed, that's also a good question. And I have personally received questions. So, actually a lot of feedback around, all right, we actually very much support this draft roadmap, but this roadmap will only be considered successful if GRESB investor members themselves understand it. And since it is them that ultimately, consume the GRESB data and with whom the engagement with managers, happens. So we need to make sure that investors are also very much aware of that. And to that end, I'm happy to say that as we speak, GRESB is conducting a global investors campaign where we have actually dedicated 3 internal staff covering our 3 key regions, geographical regions. And those 3, this global investment campaign is happening exactly to inform our GRESB investor members on these kind of issues, to make sure that they are aware that 1, there is a performance roadmap, 2, the timeline that the performance roadmap is following, and when do they expect actually the data and the scores to be significantly impacted. So there's a lot of one-to-one hand-holding engagement with our investors to make sure that they're aware of this. The second thing I want to say is we have already, a few months ago now, that's not new, we've already reviewed and redeveloped our communication channels, and we've actually developed investor-specific communication channels that aims to inform our investors, our investor members, exactly on this kind of developments at a level that is generally, more relevant to them. You can imagine that investor members are generally less involved in the very detailed of the methodology, but they definitely value, a significant impact on the GRESB score. That's something that they should know. So we have, verbal, actually often in-person campaign going on with our investors. We have dedicated investor-specific communication channel. And obviously, we also have our general communication channels that, such as this webinar is one of them, right? This is one of the kind of webinars that we'll obviously refer to in our future communication with our investors as well. Now, maybe the last thing I want to leave you with is ensuring that all investor members are aware of this roadmap is our top priority, but this is also going to be an effort that is driven by the managers themselves. I mean, in your one-on-one engagement with investors, these are opportunities to mention that the methodology is evolving, the results will be different in the future, their consumption of sustainability data will be impacted by these changes. And so this is also a joint effort between ourselves and our participants members to make sure that their investors are aware, but we're doing the best we can to make sure that they're aware of it.
Good. So let's switch gear here. We all know portfolios can span across very different sectors, and performance may vary a lot between them, of course. As we move towards more performance-based scoring, how do they account for the sector differences?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's more of a technical question, but certainly a question that we also receive from many members often. And I want to reiterate that sector specificity is a major avenue for future development in the standard. We haven't talked about it too much today because it was really about performance roadmap. But this is something that we're doing through several initiatives. And just to give you a few, I mean, in 2025, GRESB launched the residential specific modules that address residential specific topics. We are now developing a new assessment for data centers that is focusing on data centers as a sector. We're also doing quite some work thinking about how can we develop sector-specific ratings going forward. So definitely a key priority for us. Now, if you remember, as part of my presentation, my slide that was showing the targeted scoring weights beyond energy and GHG that were still TBD as of now. The reason why those scoring weights for those topics are still TBD is exactly because the GRESB Foundation recognizes that those weights actually vary depending on the sector, which is why we have a dedicated work streams at the foundation level that aims to essentially conduct a materiality assessment for all sustainability topics through a cross-sectoral lens. So we can expect those weights to be sector-specific in the future. I gave you an example of self-storage earlier. We can expect those weights to be more flexible in the future, but that is going to be something that is going to come as a next phase of the performance roadmap. The first phase focuses on greenhouse gas and GHG because these are the highest priorities by the GRESB Foundation. But as we essentially progress along this roadmap, we will start tweaking some of these weights to become more sector-specific going forward.
Thanks, Charles. You've given us a clear view of how the underlying scores will evolve on the road to performance. Now, there's one big question that has not been addressed, and that's our star scoring, of course. Should we expect any changes there, actually?
So, are you referring to specifically something in particular in the way we calculate the results, Nicole? Just can I clarify the question?
Maybe just talk about the rating in general, because obviously there are a few angles, but maybe good to address it.
The rating, the GRESB rating. So are we talking about the number of stars now? Okay, this is also a very good question. And actually, it is true that we have spoken about scores a lot in today's webinar and how the scores will be impacted and the priorities, etc. We haven't really talked about ratings that much. I would love to share more details about ratings, but we only have 1 hour. But I guess what I want to leave you with is GRESB is very, very aware of the limitations encountered by our members with regards to how the GRESB rating is calculated. It's not just about the score, it's about the rating, how the score is interpreted by our members, both managers and investors, and how the rating is determined and what it means. And I'm happy to inform that there's been extensive developments on our side, is also happening on the rating side. For example, to give you avenues that we're exploring right now, is we're aiming to develop new ways to calculate the ratings in the future. Think of sector-specific ratings that actually fits within our sector-specific efforts. Think of region-specific ratings as opposed to global ratings, region or even country-specific ratings. A third one is something that we've noticed a lot of interest from our investor members, is thematic ratings as opposed to a holistic rating. We're envisioning to develop decarbonization rating, like thematic rating essentially. And so this is also a topic that has been discussed over the last few months with the GRESB Foundation, and we do intend to actually host a separate webinar over the next couple of months to give you a bit of a breather for the upcoming break on exactly what are the avenues that we have in mind to make the rating more relevant in the future. And I think the GRESB Foundation here was quite clear on the number one priority to make the rating more relevant is to align the methodology of the GRESB rating to various investment strategies of investors and capital allocation strategies, which this is why we're looking at sector specificity, region specificity, and thematic rating, because this is really aligning with how investors are investing, allocating their capital. So stay tuned in the next couple of months. Sorry for cutting you to go. Stay tuned. In the next couple of months, we'll be hosting a dedicated webinar on the ratings themselves.
Good, thank you. Now, the last question for today. If I was a developer listening to these updates, it does feel like standing assets are getting most of the attention. So can you maybe talk about how you see the framework evolving for our developers?
That's an interesting one. Actually, it is. I would say it's not necessarily the case. It is true that the first two priorities are operational energy and operational greenhouse gas, which really belongs to the standing investment benchmark of GRESB, which mostly refers to operational assets. That is true. However, a lot of developments over the last 2 years even has been focusing on the number one issues that is the most material when it comes to the development sector, which is embodied carbon. And for the ones who know a little bit of details of the 2026 standards, for example, there's some major updates impacting embodied carbon in the development component. And there's already a set of developments that has been approved by the GRESB Foundation to impact also the same topic in 2028. So the reason why we're not talking so much about the development sector today is because the priority order of these issues is not at the top of the list. Top of the list is operational energy and greenhouse gas, but there's been a lot of development efforts on, for example, embodied carbon, but where the focus on this topic is not necessarily the performance methodology yet, simply because, as I mentioned earlier, the key kind of area of focus for the industry today when it comes to embodied carbon is rather data collection and data reliability. This is really where our development efforts are. There's a lot of focus on report the data, what is your data coverage, and how reliable your data is. That doesn't mean that embodied carbon for development funds or development portfolios is outside of the scope. It is absolutely part of the scope of this performance roadmap. It is just a matter of where do we start. But it is certainly coming for developers.
Good, thanks. That was already our last question for today. So, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our session. I want to thank Charles, Sarah, and everyone for tuning in with us today. We will be sharing this recording, of course, with everyone, and it will also include questions that we did not cover today. And of course, please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any further questions. We are here to support you along on this exciting journey. Thank you all very much for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.